House closing happened on a Thursday in October, and I remember thinking the notary's office smelled like old carpet and burned coffee. I signed my name 11 times. My hand was shaking, not from nerves, from exhaustion. I'd been running on 4 hours of sleep for 3 days straight, trying to close out a systems migration at work while simultaneously reviewing mortgage documents at midnight. Nobody in my family knew I was there. Nobody knew I was buying a house at all. That part was my mistake, I think. Or maybe it wasn't. I'd gone back and forth on it enough times that I stopped trying to decide. My name is Sloan. I'm 31, I work in IT infrastructure for a mid-sized logistics company in Mississauga, and for 6 years I lived in the same house as my parents and my older brother. That sentence sounds simpler than it was. Here's the real version. My parents immigrated from the Philippines in the early 90s. They worked hard, built a life, bought a house in a neighborhood that used to be affordable and slowly became the kind of place where people post signs about community character when a condo gets proposed nearby. They were proud of that house. My dad especially. He talked about it the way people talk about something they earned through actual sacrifice, which they had. He worked double shifts at a food processing plant for years. My mum cleaned office buildings on weekends for extra money. That house meant something. But by the time I graduated university, the mortgage had been refinanced twice. My dad's knees were bad enough that he'd been moved off the floor at work, and they were 2 missed payments away from the bank starting foreclosure proceedings. I found this out not because they told me, but because I found the registered mail on the kitchen counter when I came home for Thanksgiving. My dad had tried to hide it under a stack of flyers. I was 25. I'd been working for 3 years by then, living with roommates in Brampton, putting away money because I'd grown up watching my parents not put away money, and I was terrified of ending up in the same place. I had a decent amount saved. Not enough to buy a house outright, but enough that when I sat down and ran the numbers, I realized I could do something. I called a mortgage broker the following Monday. I didn't tell my parents. I told myself I was protecting them from stress while I figured out if it was even possible. That was partially true. But honestly, I also didn't want them to talk me out of it, and I knew my dad would try. He had this pride about accepting help that sometimes curdled into something more stubborn than useful. 3 months later, the house was in my name. The bank was paid out. My parents thought a family friend had intervened with a private loan. A story I'd constructed carefully with the help of my mum's cousin, who knew the situation and agreed the full truth would cause more conflict than it solved. The loan had no repayment schedule, no interest, no follow-up, because it wasn't real. I moved back in, took the basement bedroom, started paying all the carrying costs, mortgage, property tax, home insurance, through a joint account I managed. I told my parents it was for household expenses. They contributed what they could, which was never the full amount, and I covered the rest quietly. My brother, who had moved back in the year before after a breakup, contributed nothing. He worked in sales, made decent money, and paid nothing. Every time the subject came up, my mom would say he was getting back on his feet, and my dad would change the subject. I didn't push it. I told myself it was fine. For 5 years, I told myself it was fine. The dinner was my brother's idea. He'd just gotten a promotion, regional sales manager, which came with a bump in salary and a lot of loud phone calls in the kitchen at 7 in the morning, and he wanted to celebrate. He picked a steakhouse on the lakeshore, the kind where the menus don't have prices on them, and somehow it was understood, without anyone saying it out loud, that I would pay. I did. $2,300 for 6 people, including his girlfriend and her sister, who I'd met twice. I put it on my credit card and smiled the whole time and drove home alone, while everyone else piled into my parents' car. 2 weeks later, my mom knocked on my bedroom door on a Sunday morning. She had that particular expression she gets when she's already decided something and is presenting it as a conversation. I know that expression very well. She sat on the edge of my bed and told me that my brother was going to move into my room. I think I heard the words correctly the first time. I just couldn't make them land properly. I said, "I'm sorry." She explained patiently that my brother's girlfriend was moving in with him. His room, which is the larger of the two upstairs bedrooms, was fine for one person but cramped for two. My room, also upstairs, was the same size, but he wanted them to have a fresh start in a different space. Her logic was that since I worked from home most days anyway, I should take his old room. It was a practical solution. I sat there for a moment. "Mom," I said, "this is my room." "It's all our home," she said. And that specific phrase is the one I keep coming back to. It's all our home. Said so calmly, said like it was the most obvious thing in the world. I didn't say anything else that morning. I told her I'd think about it, which I had no intention of doing, and I went downstairs and made coffee and stood at the kitchen window looking at the backyard for a long time. I should tell you what I was thinking, but the honest answer is that I wasn't thinking clearly. I was somewhere between fury and a kind of cold, almost amused disbelief, like watching someone confidently walk in the wrong direction on a one-way street. Over the next few days, nothing was said directly, but things started happening. My brother came into my room to measure the windows. His girlfriend stopped by twice, and I heard her talking to my mum about paint colours. Something in a sage green, very calming. I found a box of my brother's clothes stacked in the hallway outside my door. I went to work. I answered emails. I ate dinner with my family and said normal things. My dad, to his credit, seemed uncomfortable with the situation and mostly avoided me, which I think was the closest he knew how to come to expressing disapproval of something my mum had decided. On the Wednesday of that week, my brother cornered me in the kitchen. He was in a good mood, which somehow made it worse. "So when do you think you'll be fully moved out of the room?" he asked. Just like that. Like we'd already settled it. "I'm not," I said. He looked at me the way people look at someone who's made an obvious miscalculation. "Sloane, come on! You know how important this is." I said I did understand that it was important to him. I just didn't agree that it was something that was mine to give. He sighed. He said, "This is a family home. We all have to compromise sometimes." I poured myself a glass of water and went back downstairs. That evening, I called my lawyer. Well, she's not technically my personal lawyer, but she handled my property purchase, and I'd kept her contact from exactly the kind of situation where I might need to use it. I explained what was happening. She said what I already knew. The house was mine, the deed was in my name, and my family had no legal claim to any specific part of it. She also gently noted that technically they were all tenants, non-paying, non-documented tenants, which gave me a particular kind of power that I hadn't yet chosen to exercise. I hung up and sat with that for a while. The next morning was a Thursday, and I remember it clearly because it was garbage day and the sound of the truck always woke me up early. I heard my mom and my brother's girlfriend on the upstairs landing talking quietly. I heard my mom say, "She'll come around, she just needs time." I heard my brother's girlfriend say, "I love the light in that room." I got up, made coffee, and pulled out the folder I kept in the fireproof lockbox under my bed. The deed was there, the original mortgage discharge letter, 5 years of bank records showing every payment, property tax receipts, insurance policies, all of it, clean and organized in clear plastic sleeves. My mom came into the kitchen about an hour later. She saw me at the table with the folder in front of me, and her face did something complicated. "What's that?" she asked. "Sit down," I said. "There's something I should have told you a long time ago." I don't know what I expected. I think I expected anger, then disbelief, then maybe a long silence. What I didn't expect was for my mum to go very quiet very quickly, the way she does when she's genuinely processing something and not just reacting. She looked at the mortgage discharge. She looked at the deed. She looked at my name printed at the top of both documents. "You bought the house," she said. "Yes." "When the bank was going to take it." "Yes." She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Why didn't you tell us?" "Because Dad would have said no," I said, "and I couldn't let that happen." She didn't argue with that. We both knew it was true. My brother came downstairs about 20 minutes later in a good mood again, hair still damp from the shower, already on his phone. He stopped when he saw my mum's face. "What happened?" he said. My mum looked at him and then at me. I hadn't moved from the table. "Sloane owns the house," she said. The way he looked at the documents was different from how my mum had looked at them. She had gone quiet. He went red. That doesn't make sense," he said. "You live here too." "I do," I said. "I've also been paying the mortgage, the property taxes, and the home insurance for the past 6 years." He picked up the deed, looked at it, put it down, picked up the mortgage discharge. I watched his face move through several things in quick succession: surprise, confusion, the particular kind of calculation that happens when someone is trying to figure out what this means for them specifically. "So what does this mean?" he asked. "It means," I said, "that no one is moving into my room." He started to say something about the family home, about being reasonable, about how things don't have to be this way. I let him talk for a minute. Then I said, "You've been living here for 4 years without contributing $1 to the carrying costs. I haven't said anything about that, but I'm not giving up my bedroom so your girlfriend can have better light." His girlfriend was at the top of the stairs. I don't know how long she'd been there. She came down slowly, very carefully, like someone who had just understood that the situation she'd walked into was not the one she'd been told about. My dad came home from his physio appointment around noon. My mum told him. I wasn't in the room for that conversation, but I heard it through the kitchen ceiling. It was a long conversation. When my dad came downstairs, his eyes were red, and I felt something break open in my chest a little, because whatever else he was someone who had worked himself into bad knees and bent up shoulders, trying to build something for us, and finding out the way he did couldn't have been easy. He sat across from me at the kitchen table and he said, "You saved us." I said, "I tried to." He said, "You should have told me." I said, "You would have said no." He was quiet for a moment. "Yes," he said, "I would have." He looked at his hands. "That would have been very stupid of me." That was the hardest moment of the whole thing, honestly. Not my brother's anger or my mom's silence. My dad saying that. My dad admitting that his pride would have cost us the house. The conversation about what happened next took about a week to fully settle. My brother and his girlfriend did not move into my room. They stayed in his room for another 2 months and then found a 1-bedroom apartment in Oakville. He could afford it. He just hadn't wanted to pay for it when living at home was available to him. My mom cried the day he moved out, and I sat with her on the back porch and didn't say anything about the fact that she was mourning an arrangement that had only been possible because of me. Some things I didn't say out loud. I was learning that there were certain arguments you could win completely and still lose something in the winning. I had a conversation with my parents, both of them together, which is how I handle things that need to be handled cleanly, about how things would work going forward. I told them I was not interested in evicting them. I told them the house would remain their home for as long as they needed it, but there would be a formal rental agreement, modest and fair, and it would be paid monthly, and the money would go into an account I kept for the property. They agreed. My dad signed a paper with his reading glasses on and his jaw tight, and something in him that looked like it was quietly rearranging itself. My mom made halo the next afternoon. She didn't say it was an apology. I didn't ask her to call it one. My brother texted me about 6 weeks after he moved out. He said he was sorry. He said he hadn't understood the situation, which I found a bit hard to believe entirely, but I also didn't think he'd understood how much I'd absorbed quietly over the years, and that ignorance might have been at least partially genuine. I texted back, not warmly, not coldly, a door left slightly ajar. What I know now, that I didn't know then, is that "it's all our home" is a sentence people say when they mean your name on the paperwork shouldn't matter as much as how we feel about it. And feelings matter. I'm not saying they don't. But a deed is a deed. A name on a mortgage is not a metaphor. 5 years of payments is not a sentiment. It's a financial record, and it exists whether or not anyone in your family wants to look at it. I still live in the house. I'm in my room with my stuff, with the window that faces the backyard where my dad planted tomatoes every summer for 25 years. My parents are upstairs. The house is mine. It always was, from the moment I signed my name 11 times in an office that smelled like burnt coffee and old carpet. Nobody's moving into my room. I still think about that Sunday morning sometimes. My mum sitting on the edge of my bed, so calm, so certain, explaining to me that I should give up my room. And I think about how close I came to just nodding and going along with it. Not because I agreed, but because that's what years of keeping the peace trains you to do. What I understand now, looking back at all of it, is that the consequences were already built into the choices long before anyone acknowledged them. When I paid the mortgage every month without saying a word, I was making a choice. When my brother lived in that house for 4 years and handed over nothing, he was making a choice. When my mom looked at the table and said, "It's all our home," she was drawing on years of a dynamic that I had quietly allowed to exist. None of it arrived out of nowhere. It accumulated, and at some point the accumulation became a wall and someone had to decide whether to walk into it or stop. I don't think I was particularly brave. I think I was just tired enough to be honest. The thing about doing the right thing quietly, for a long time without acknowledgement, is that it can start to feel like it didn't happen, like the 6 years of payments were somehow less real because no one witnessed them. Like saving the house from foreclosure was a private transaction that didn't count in the economy of the family. That's a particular kind of erosion, when your actions exist but your authority doesn't. I had the deed, I had every receipt, and still I almost let my brother's girlfriend pick out pink colors for my room. What stopped me wasn't anger exactly, it was clarity. The kind that comes when you finally stop trying to manage everyone else's feelings about a situation and just look at the situation itself. I think there's something worth sitting with in the way my dad responded. He said, "That would have been very stupid of me," about his own refusal. He wasn't wrong, it would have been. But the fact that he could say it, that he could look at the shape of what his stubbornness would have cost us and name it plainly, that meant something. It takes a particular kind of integrity to do that. To look at your own blind spots and not flinch away from them. My brother is still working on that part. What I came away with is this: you can be generous and still have limits. You can love your family and still hold a boundary. Those things aren't contradictions even when the people around you treat them like they are. Paying the mortgage for 6 years wasn't a mistake. Not telling anyone sooner, that part I do differently. Not because I owe anyone a performance of sacrifice, but because letting a misunderstanding run that long gave it room to become a belief. And beliefs, once settled, are harder to move than furniture. The folder under my bed didn't change what was true. The truth was always there. The folder just made it undeniable. I'm still in my room. The window still faces the backyard. My dad's tomatoes came up again this summer. Thick and a little crooked, same as always. Some things hold.